Rev'd Up by day.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the 4th episode of Rev'd Up by Death. Today is a different podcast. Unfortunately, our Reverend Gavin Locke was unable to make it, but we are introduced by Pat Klepp, Dr. Pat Klepp, Dr. Estelle van Staden, and Mr. Neil Kite, who's the Managing Director of Tom Kite Funeral Plans, as well as Funeral Directors. Dr. van Staden, Dr. Klepp, thank you so much for being on this podcast. It is an absolute honor to have you guys share the space with us.
Thank you.
Dad, Mr. Kites, thank you as well for joining us on Rev'd Up by Death, episode 4. Today's podcast is very interesting. We obviously have the two doctors here that sign off on paperwork, deal with forensic pathology, and we're going to be asking them a bunch of questions that lots of people in our line of work ask us on a numerous amounts of occasions, when planning a funeral, etc. So, first of all, Dr. van Staden and Dr. Klepp, please can you introduce yourselves?
Dr. Klepp, you go first. Thank you. Well, I am Dr. Klepp. I'm a forensic pathologist. I've been in this field doing the work for about 46 years. 38 of those years were solely for the government and the university as a lecturer, and I've done private work for a number of years and do now hold the position of medical referee for cremations.
I'm also a forensic pathologist. I've been doing this for around 19 years, and I've been in government and then partially in government for the past few years, and have now resigned and am doing private work solely, and I'm the confirmatory medical doctor.
I think, we're going to touch on that later, but there is a difference between a confirmatory doctor and a medical referee, which we'll touch base on a bit later. But can you just tell me, how long did the peer review actually study for?
Well, there is the undergraduate degree for 6 years for an MBBCH. And I then did my house job here at Baragwanath. And as I had a bursary at university, I had to pay it back. So I started working as a general practitioner for the government as a district surgeon, during which time the man who employed me said, wouldn't you be interested to come to the mortuary and see what that was like? And that was, as I say, 46 years ago. Mm. So I went on and did initially a diploma in forensic medicine, which I think is a good idea because it actually gives you an idea as to whether you actually want to do this work or not. Mm. And when I was in Cape Town graduating, the two professors, the doyens of forensic pathology in this country, Professors Gordon and Shapiro, said, no, my girl, you need to specialize. Now, no girls had ever done it before. And I got this overwhelming feeling, all right, I'll show you. Yeah. And so I went on and did 2 further 4-year degrees. I did a fellowship in forensic pathology and a master's degree in forensic pathology.
Sure. Yeah, so I studied at the University of Pretoria. That's 6 years, did a year of housemanship, internship, which I did in Ermelo, and then another year at that stage, community service was already introduced. So I did a year of community service at that stage. It was just a year, not the 2 years like they do now. And then I worked in private for a bit, and then I started working as a registrar, which is a doctor in training in forensic pathology. And I also did the fellowship in forensic pathology.
Wow, so numerous amounts of years of studying.
About 12, I think.
12. And Pat?
It was 12, but the master's degree took me an extra year. I did the 2 degrees simultaneously, a forensic pathology and the master's degree, and one has to produce a dissertation. That took me an extra year, so 13 years.
Wow. And at some point, during university practicals, did you ever say to yourself, maybe I don't want to do this? What gave you that drive to say, I really want to do or become a forensic pathology?
Well, in second year university, I was the only person in the class to faint when we were dissecting their body. And so everybody said, one thing Pat will never do is deal with dead bodies. And that's all that Pat has dealt with her entire life. So I was not, whereas Estelle will tell you she wanted to be a forensic pathologist from the time she was little. I think I could have been happy in any specialty, but when Dennis Kemp had said to me, come and have a look what the work's like at the mortuary, I found it the most exciting profession, and I've loved it, and I still do love it. Although I have stopped the physical side of the work, I still am involved, as you know, with the refereeing of cremations.
My story is slightly different. Like Pat just told you, I was very small when I told my mom I wanted to be a doctor, and I think I was 14 when I said I want to be a forensic pathologist. I don't want to just be a doctor. And so I actually did medicine to do forensic pathology. That's always been my thing. And that love has never left me either. I must say I did enjoy the autopsies from an anatomical pathology point of view as well. But I've never liked microscope work. So it didn't appeal to me at all. So I immediately, the minute I could get a post as to train as a forensic pathologist, I did just that. And the same story. I love it. I love every single minute of it.
Can you explain to the viewers what do you actually do in your daily lives as a forensic pathologist?
The first thing we do is often in the middle of the night, a call will come through.
In the middle of the night?
Yes, 2, 3 o'clock, I'd be driving into Soweto with my husband doing the driving, me sitting there. We would meet at the government mortuary, and then the police van would drive in front, the one to pick up the body, and I'd have actual police escorting us from the back, drive us into, for instance, the cells in Deep Kloof or Jabulani or wherever, and then we are called out to assess how long a person's been dead for, if they're found, for instance, hanging in the cell, and you would see whether it fits in with the story that the police give. You have a look, for instance, in a hanging, whether it does fit a suicide or whether it looks as though the person had been assaulted and then suspended. So that was all very exciting work. But also in the suburbs, everywhere, wherever there was, and in fact I was criticised in court for calling it an important murder, but when there is like a high-profile murder or where the police feel that we can contribute by giving them an idea as to what weapons been used, whether, for instance, if a person's in the bath, whether they have just drowned from just slipping down, an elderly lady neglected, or whether somebody's had their head held down into the bath. And then the police know whether to sort of possibly make a death natural or unnatural, or how they should proceed.
Yeah, the rest of your day is often spent doing one of a few things. We do autopsies at Joburg, usually 4 per day per doctor, so that takes quite a bit of time, and then there's a lot of paperwork involved as well. Every autopsy generates an autopsy report, and on top of that sometimes a negligence report where you have to give an opinion as to was the medical treatment of the deceased person adequate, or is there medical negligence that contributed to the death, and then other kinds of medical opinions. And then lastly, court cases. We are often called to court. So that also takes up quite a considerable amount of time.
And how often do the pair of you go to court? Like, is it quite frequently or?
Many years ago, going back over 40 years, I used to go to court religiously almost every day. The courts ran superbly. The prosecutors would call us timeously. They would consult before the court case. We would go to the court and testify. I found that as the years proceeded, it's dropped off considerably. The prosecutors often don't call. The defense say they don't need you because they can accept your report and affidavit for. And then the judge nowadays often says, I want the pathologist here to answer questions. So it's nothing like it was, although a couple of days ago I did testify in court via Zoom for a court case in Pothologists. And I have been on Zoom for one of the post-mortems I did on these premises for a young lady who died in Mozambique, and the court case was in Melbourne. And again, they did the Zoom court case from Australia to my home, which was great.
Yeah, I often, it's definitely dropped off. Even just looking at the number of years I've spent, it was much different from when I just started. It's dropped off considerably, and but I always go in the cases because I'm closer, I think, and it is usually either in Johannesburg Magistrates Court or Johannesburg High Court. So I've been in court a few times this year already, but it definitely isn't like it used to be.
Yes. And tell me, obviously being a forensic pathologist, like, what are maybe name 2 cases that have stuck with you throughout your career?
I think the two that stick out for me is I had the privilege of doing the post-mortem on Chris Harney.
Wow. That's
and
special.
one of my colleagues, Dr. Steenekamp, was actually acted as my scribe.
Sure.
And I had been called by the Attorney General, I think it was Klaas van Leers und Volker in those days, to ask me to do the post-mortem. The other one that stands out is I did the post-mortem on Stompie, who was the little boy involved with Willie Mandela and Richardson. And then I think over and above those two, one of the finest experiences I ever had is I was invited to go to Malawi. And with the police forensic policeman, we exhumed 4 politicians that President Banda had allegedly assassinated, assassinated, which I did. And we did that. And then I went back and testified in the High Court in Blantyre. But I think for me, those are the 3 that stand out.
Wow. Very, very, very special to have the knowledge and to share your experience, to tell people that you've done that, Dr. Keck. That's incredible.
Thank you. Mine's quite different. I think I've always had this thing about child deaths, and in fact, I considered doing my master's degree on child deaths. The one is a case I actually described in my book, a little girl that was raped and strangled by a gentleman that was looking after her. So that was quite a high-profile case at the time. And the other one is a case that I testified in recently, a little girl that was found drowned in a bath. And the father's girlfriend girlfriend is on trial currently for that, what we thought is murder. Wow. Or what was presented as murder. So, I mean, there's obviously not been a judgment yet. So those two, I think.
Extremely emotional as well. I mean, how do you guys face death? I mean, you see this every day, and so do we as funeral directors. But how do you deal with your emotions? Like, is it kind of like the norm now? You've done it for so many years that you're okay, or do you still have that sense of like you feel sorry for the family, you feel sorry for the deceased? Because I'm quite an emotional person. I think females in general, that's just my opinion. My dad, no. Well, yes, you are, Dad, but I know you don't like us to be emotional. But I mean, in your job, like, do you find it quite difficult?
I think we were not thrown in at the deep end. In other words, we haven't come into this job in the position we're in. We started off working all the way through medical school, through catfish and frogs dissections, and then we moved on to a body. But slowly but surely you're exposed to everything. And that's why I'm amazed. When students just come in and they see what's going on and they seem totally unfazed, I think they've seen so much on television. But as far as the actual emotion goes, we're very fortunate, I think, in not having a lot to deal with the families. I think you as an undertaker have the emotional side of your job to cope with. I am not involved with that much at all, although I do, at the foot of my reports that I wrote, invite families to phone me every evening at 8 o'clock at night, and they would discuss the findings. That would be more emotional, but I do distance myself from it, and I'm not drained. And that's why I don't understand people who've worked all their lives with dead bodies saying, "Oh, I'm so stressed, I need to take some leave." It hasn't affected me like that at all.
No, I have to agree with you. I don't think I'm particularly emotional in any case. I think I'm definitely more of a left brainer. So I look at it from the point of view that we're actually helping somebody, and from forensic pathology side, you don't get to deal with the families all that much. You are given an autopsy to do and you get a history, but you don't get the families phoning you or so forth. In terms of the private work, in terms of the autopsies that we do here, I have the same, basically the same line at the bottom of my reports where I ask families, or that I invite them, should there be anything unclear or if they need any explanation, they're most welcome to phone. And that is definitely more emotional. But at the end of the day, I think what helps me is the fact that you are actually giving people answers. You are providing them
with a bit of
closure. Yeah, so you still look at a person and think, I'm sorry this has happened to them. But if you get emotionally involved, you're definitely not going to be able to look at things the way that you should. My job is to correctly document and accurately reflect every single injury that person has sustained. If I stand there crying, it's definitely not going to happen. And then I did them a disservice as well.
Yeah. I think both doctors have actually pretty summed it up there, that they're actually dealing with the actual corpse, the cadaver itself, which don't talk to you. Us as funeral directors that are actually dealing with the bereaved family, we more or less like right in the firing line, and some families actually take it out on us, believe it or not. Like, I mean, they would go to the state mortuary, do the identification, and then come straight here to do the arrangements. And we are straight there in that firing line, and they tend to take it out on us a little bit. But I think we all know how to try and deal with the families. But yeah, I think you've actually hit the nail on the head there, that's why they don't really get emotionally involved. We try not to, because if we did with every single case, we wouldn't be here.
What I have found, Gabby, quite interesting is I've done a post-mortem on a number of people I've personally known. Through my boys being at school, if anybody through the school died, they would ask me to do the post-mortem. I've done post-mortems on some of our best friends.
Wow.
And I did not feel emotionally upset. I can't, whether somebody would say I've lost that side of me, I don't think so, because I'm quite a tearful person. And one of the more senior doctors when I was younger said, you know, Pat, you're going to have to toughen up. But I now don't get upset by much.
But you've had the doctor tell you that. My dad tells me that quite often. And I think that's, I mean, some families love the fact that you show a lot of empathy and you're sympathetic and things like that. And maybe it might be a downfall to me, but that's just the way I like to do business. Do you know what I mean? So I do get very emotional, and I know it's obviously not the right thing, because we're helping many families on a day-to-day basis. It's not just 4 families. You might be seeing 10 families, you know? So, I mean, that's just the way I like to do things. And like I said earlier on, females are a bit more emotional than men. Ladies, speaking about state mortuaries, can we just identify what the difference between a natural death is and an unnatural death, and what are the sort of circumstances? You know, let's say, for example, there's been an overdose in a townhouse complex in Johannesburg. Okay, the paramedics get there. What happens? Like, what's the procedure?
Should I start and then you carry on?
100.
Deaths are divided into natural and unnatural. Natural are basically all the diseases. So if a person has had a stroke, a heart attack, cancer, that's all considered to be natural. The unnatural are the shootings, the hangings, the stabbings, the strangulations. So when a person dies, the first person to be called out is often the police or the ambulance service. And both of them should be trained in knowing the one from the other. So if the police arrive and they say, we're not suspicious of this death at all, you may call an undertaker, then an undertaker would come in. But the person needs to be certified dead first. So the ambulance service would come and certify the person dead. If a person has obviously been shot, stabbed, strangled, well, the police are called, and then the police don't say call an undertaker. They say this is an unnatural death, and the body will be transferred by the police to the government mortuary.
Yeah, so it's actually the law that determines when a death is regarded as unnatural, and that falls under the National Health Act and the Code and the regulations. And those are the cases, like Dr. Klepp explained, where there's mechanical impact or chemical influence, like the overdose that you just mentioned, or the sudden, unexpected, unexplained death. The lady that walks in the street and suddenly collapses and dies is usually regarded as an unnatural death until the autopsy has been done. It could then be found that she also took an overdose, and that remains an unnatural death. But she could just as well have had, for example, a ruptured ectopic pregnancy, and she bled, and that's then regarded as a natural death. The other instance is where a death that would normally be regarded as natural is now regarded as unnatural due to an act of omission or commission. So that would, for example, be the person with severe ischemic heart disease, and there's a robber that comes in, and that gentleman dies from a heart attack, but the contributing factor, the fact that there was a robbery, makes that an unnatural death. Or the person that sits in line waiting to be treated in hospital, they've got a diabetic crisis, but now the hospital staff are all on strike. That then becomes an unnatural death, even though the disease process itself is natural. And then the last one that's very similar to that is in terms of the Health Professions Amendment Act, where it's a procedure-related death. Yes. So the disease process often is natural, But because a procedure has been performed and the person hasn't completely recovered from that, or there's a complication of the procedure, that then becomes an unnatural.
Is that normally like sepsis or?
Sepsis could be one, or say, for example, there's a surgical mishap, or the person dies on the table, so they've got a ruptured appendix, but they never got off the table, they die on that table. That remains an unnatural death, even though the entire process is natural, even though we're not saying that the doctors were negligent at all. Just in terms of the law, it's regarded as an unnatural.
Because I think families, the immediate thing is, the doctor, it's negligence. It's
Not
negligence.
at all.
And lots of families, I mean, when we phone in the morning, it's like, why does my mom or my dad or my granny or my grandpa have to go to the mortuary? And then you've got to explain to them that it was like a procedural death. There might have been a complication during the anesthetic and things like that. So people don't know. So this podcast is to give the viewers that knowledge of that could possibly happen when having an operation.
I think it's in the interests of the public and the doctors to have those deaths investigated. Occasionally they're not properly investigated and then the family's all agitated about the doctor. So we would rather do more medico-legal post-mortems than few, because it's the interest of the public, the doctor, the hospitals, and everybody involved.
So with an unnatural death, right, the forensic pathology department will collect the deceased from the scene.
Correct.
Okay. Take the loved one to the state mortuary, and then obviously as forensic pathologists, you're allocated an amount of cadavers per day to do autopsies. How quick is that process?
Well, it depends on how busy the mortuary is at that stage. Obviously, it depends.
Over the weekends, it's probably busier.
After the weekends, it's usually much busier. And they obviously try to work as fast as possible. So everybody knows that there's a family on the other side.
Practically speaking, each body gets a number. And first in will be first out. Unless a person has been identified. So it's a good idea for the family to go to the government mortuary. Between 10 and about 12 in the morning, they do the identifications. They go with the deceased's death ID and their own ID. And once a body's been identified formally, that one will move up the list. So if a body's just left there unidentified, you might only get the post-mortem next week, because bodies are best seen before post-mortems for identification.
Right.
The features change, and so as soon as a body is identified, that one will sort of move up and the others will stay behind.
Okay. Then obviously with natural, the paramedics get there, they do the declaration of death, and then the families can phone us funeral directors. A lot of our business, we do the cremations and the burials. And questions I'm asked today is, why am I paying for doctor's fees and medical referee? So my question to you guys is, with cremation documents, what is actually involved?
Okay. May I
I think
start?
that you
You
start.
carry on.
Doing it for a long time. I have.
There is an ordinance of 1965 called the Cremation Ordinance that governs the cremation of bodies. And one has to appreciate that when a body is cremated, you are left with literally dust. You can't DNA it. You can only either go and scatter it in the sea, bury it if you want to, feed your roses with it. So there is nothing left in order to get any evidence from it. So once a body's gone, it has gone. And therefore, we have to be very strict, and we are, in following the regulations of the ordinance. And so what it involves in the way of paperwork is the following. You Gabby, have mentioned how the ambulance service will issue a certificate basically saying this person is dead and they're not suspicious of it. You will then pick up the body and bring it to your premises, and then the following has to happen. You need to get hold of a form called a notification of death, or a BI 1663. If the deceased had a doctor who was treating the person, then it's not difficult. The undertaker then phones the doctor and says, Mrs. Brown, your patient has died, and please would you issue the 1663. If that doctor was the attending doctor of the deceased, they may not charge for issuing that BI once. It's considered to be immoral.
Thank you for clarifying that, Dr. Kip.
But if they want the body cremated, there's an additional form that doctor needs to fill out. It's called a Schedule B. Now, if we first go back to the Schedule A, the Schedule A is the application by the next of kin to have the person cremated. It's not ideal to have somebody who's not the next of kin, but if that has to be, they must then vouch for why they're doing it. Then you've got the Schedule B that the attending doctor has to fill out. And it's crucial that the names are absolutely perfectly reflected, that the ID number is correct. It has the date of death on it, the place of death on it. And me as referee finally has to scrutinize all these forms, although Dr. Histel would also have seen the Schedule B. They have to say whether the person ever worked in the mine or not, because the family are given the option of having the cardiothoracic organs excised and examined for compensation. So if somebody worked in the gold mines or even out of the mines, if they worked with some occupational hazard, paint, wood, and it's one of these big corporates that could possibly be sued, we suggest having those out. They don't have to. If they don't want to have them out, there is an additional form that you undertakers give the family to sign where you give them options. We want to have them out. We don't want to have them out. Yes. You can have them out at the government premises for which you don't pay. You could get a private doctor to do it, which will expedite it, or you don't have to have them out. They also have to answer a very important question of the pacemaker, because many, many people have pacemakers and reveals and stimulators inserted into those bodies. And those explode in a crematorium. And in fact, I was in a crematorium once when one had been left in a body, and the cremator had the door slightly open because the temperature had got too high. That pacemaker kept shooting out like a red hot bullet at 900 degrees.
Sure.
And so if they're not taken out, one, they're dangerous for the people in the crematorium to be exposed to the radioactivity. And two, if they do explode in the cremator, cremators cost millions, and I'm not exaggerating, to build. So that's the pacemaker question, the minor question. And then the doctor mustn't have any doubt as to the cause of death, because in terms of the act, the cause of death has got to be definitely ascertained. You can't have a 50-year-old just not wake up in the morning and a doctor issue a certificate natural, but we don't know why. Because, in fact, one of the very best and first cases I was ever involved with was at Chrissy'smere, on the Swaziland border, where I went with a professor who I worked with at the time. A lady had had an epileptic attack. She was known to be epileptic, and about 2 weeks later, she'd been buried. The family said, yes, she had an epileptic attack, but this time she was actually hit before she fell backward.
No.
So we drove all the way to Chrissy'smere and exhumed the body, and the professor did the post-mortem, and there was this amazing fracture, typical of falling onto the back of your head. If she had been cremated on natural causes, we would never have been able to substantiate that, in fact, she'd been assaulted. And so that's a Schedule B. And then the next certificate that has to be done is the one that Dr. Histel is involved with.
And Dr. Van Sanen, just to confirm, you are the confirmatory doctor.
That's
so
correct.
there's the attending doctor involved, there's
Correct.
the confirmatory doctor involved, and there's the medical referee involved.
Correct.
And if there's been a medico-legal post-mortem,
There's a forensic pathologist, forensic medical officer involved as well.
so in a usual case, there'd be the attending doctor, the confirmatory doctor, the referee. If there's been a post-mortem, you'd probably not have the Schedules B and C, but you'd have a D.
And then you could have another doctor issuing the BI as well, the DHA. So, so I have a look at the documentation sent to me, which often comprises of the DHA 1663 or the BI 1663, and then the Schedule B. And it's my duty to make sure that the credentials are correct and that the cause of death is correctly stated and that it's a specific cause of death. It's not just cardiac arrest or respiratory failure, that we need to know exactly what led to that person dying so that we can make sure that it couldn't be an unnatural death. It's my job as well to ensure that I check that the person, the deceased, was not a mine worker, that there isn't a pacemaker, that there isn't brachytherapy pellets, for example, that could also pose a problem. So all of that I note on the next form then, which then goes ahead to the...
Yes, but Histel, you make it out to be easier than it is. The job of the confirmatory doctor is not just to take the cause of death off the B. Hystel often has to either phone you, the undertaker, and say that I have a concern here because the person was paraplegic and has now died of septic bed sores. We need to know what was the cause of the paraplegia, because if, for instance, a person was involved in a car crash 40 years ago, and they die now, but they wouldn't have died now had they not been involved in
I had a case like that. I remember I had a case like that.
Yeah, it remains an unnatural death.
Unnatural. And so she has to scrutinize, because sometimes the doctors conceal things, either advertently or inadvertently.
Sometimes they don't realize that it is an unnatural death.
So Hystel then has to phone the doctors, or she
family
often, will confirm with me. Sometimes both of us speak to people. So her job is crucial.
And with you having this crucial job, Doc, is that the Schedule C that you issue?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would jot down all the medical history that I then obtained from either the family or from the hospital or from the treating doctor, so that we have a paper trail of exactly why this doctor is saying that the cause of death was this or that.
Okay. And then what's the next document? So Schedule C? Is there a Schedule D?
D is crucial. I have a lot of problems with a lot of undertakers who think that the D is not required. The D is crucial because the top part of the form has the details of the deceased. Yes. The bottom part of the form is a certificate by the funeral undertaker, in which the person, he or she, vouches for the fact that that body's been identified to them, and that they will hand over with the forms that we have done to the crematorium with the correct body. Because if, for instance, you've got a Sally Brown in your fridge and you've got a Sandra Brown in your fridge, and Sandra is burnt instead of Sally, whoever filled out that bottom bit will be in trouble, because they vouched for the correct Mrs. Brown to be handed over. And then the Schedule D is also, for instance, when there's been a post-mortem. So I'm no longer doing the post-mortems. Dr. van Staden's doing them. If it's a natural case, she fills out the top of the Schedule D. If it's an unnatural death, that's done by the doctors of the government mortuary. Yes. And again, I get suspicious when they just say unnatural causes. Then I would phone the undertaker and say, has the body been cut? Because unfortunately, the standard of practice in forensic pathology is not the same in the big cities as it is in rural areas, or even in the cities. I find very shoddy work sometimes with private pathologists. And that's why it's crucial that somebody like you employ a proper, full-blown pathologist to do the postmortem, and not just a GP. I know of a GP who says that he can do a keyhole postmortem.
What? No way.
No, but
is that in Johannesburg, Pat?
Yes. We both know the doctor. He can do a keyhole at obviously a fraction of the price. Well, not a fraction.
Maybe it's a fraction of the price.
Fraction of the price.
I wouldn't think so. I really wouldn't think so.
And I don't know what you can see.
Tell me about the Schedule E. Doctors?
The Schedule E is the one that the medical referee does. And there's a responsibility that goes with it. So people always say, how on earth can you just charge for it? Well, it takes quite a lot of time from me each day to scrutinize these papers. So in other words, I have to be issued with the burial order, which is the form that once the undertaker has taken that form to Home Affairs sends back. That shows me that the death has been registered. So let's say, for instance, a person dies overseas and you repatriate the body and you want to have it cremated. You can't just give me the papers and say, please sign it. I've got to be convinced that that death that occurred in Dubai is now registered in terms of South Africa. So the undertaker will have taken the death certificate from Dubai to Home Affairs. Home Affairs issue the notification of death and the burial order. You come back with the burial order. That's the first certificate you give me. I've got to check that all those names are absolutely spelled correctly and are. Sometimes I get different names on the forms because somebody's got married, but they haven't gone back to Home Affairs to register. So I've got to work on the official names of the person when they die.
With the ID number.
And the ID number won't change. Yes.
No, but what I'm saying is that you also check that.
Yes. Oh, yes. I can't just accept a name, and it's got to be the ID number, the date of death, the date of birth, where they died, the cause of death, and then the bottom bit is filled out by Home Affairs. Then there's the Schedule A that the family need to fill out. And this is also crucial because sometimes the families conceal things. They'll say, no, the person was not a minor. And the doctor says, yes, the person was a minor. So then I have to phone you, the undertaker, or if I'm here, I'll ask you. And then you phone the family, they'll say, yes, he was a minor, but we don't want the lungs out. Well, that's not how it's done. They must say, yes, he was a minor, and fill out that additional form to say, yes, he was, but we don't want. Other questions that the families are asked, again, are the pacemakers. I mean, I'm absolutely appalled sometimes that families aren't even aware that there's radio.
Exactly, yeah.
The pellets that we were talking about, that Dr. van Staden mentioned.
That's only radioactive within the first year of
1 year. So if a person dies within 1 year of implantation, the prostate has to be excised. And in fact, that reminds me, Gabby, because what is important, one of the things you asked me prior to this meeting today was about charging, and particularly about the notification of death. Can doctors charge for it? I did indicate to you, no, attending doctors may not. But let's say, for instance, you take a body in and there's a strong history that is natural causes, but the person has died at the Johannesburg, was attended to by the Johannesburg General Hospital. You cannot, as an undertaker, get a notification of death out of those doctors because they've not seen the deceased. So you would need to engage a doctor, and at the moment you are having at your disposal Dr. van Staden, and she will come in, she will have a look at the history the family or you have given her. She will examine the body, check that the person hasn't been shot or stabbed.
Yes.
Now, it's like calling out a plumber. If you call out a plumber to a dripping tap, you can't say, but he shouldn't charge. All he had to do was tighten the bolt. Dr. van Staden is allowed to charge the family. And the prices that we charge are very reasonable. I've always had the example set to me by Professor Jack Allen, who was the doyen of cremations in this town, that we are here to offer a service. But I charge it. Well, so does Estelle. Far less than a plumber would charge. I had one out to replace a washer yesterday. So, so that she is entitled to charge for. And then the doctors are entitled to charge for the B, the C, and the E. The government doctor may not charge. The issuing of the Schedule D is included of the post-mortem, for which the doctors are paid by the government.
So if I could just explain the scenario. So I've had a case, the deceased had cancer for the last 10 years, was being treated at Baragwanath Hospital. Okay, at the oncology, once a week would go for chemo. And eventually they said, unfortunately, there's nothing more we can do for you. Please go home and get comfortable. The loved one goes home, gets comfortable, and then passes away. Okay, they didn't go to any other doctor but Barra.
Yes.
Okay, but now the person's passed at home. Now the family, they want to cremate. What happens? Because nobody's willing to do the DHA 1663.
No.
And nor is there a doctor to do the B form. So what happens? We need to have a post-mortem.
No. Well, no. That's not actually correct, Gabby. The doctors at the hospitals may not issue a 1663 if the person has not died in the hospital, because we have had a lot of fraud in the undertaking business and with deaths, and therefore they have not seen the dead person, and so they may not. So you would need to engage somebody like Dr. van Staden to come to your premises and do what I explained she has to do. But to get the Schedule B, you don't have to say there has to be a post-mortem. You say to the family, here's the Schedule B. If you don't have any joy at the hospital, here's the Schedule B. Go down to Baragwanath, get out their file, and take it to the ward where the person used to go to. And there are doctors there. There are housemen. There are registrars. There are consultants. If you can't get one of those, they can actually go to the superintendent with the file. So in other words, it would be easier. You could say, look, you can either do that, which is a schlep, or if you would like a post-mortem, we could engage Dr. van Staden.
Yeah. And the family gets more closure as well with the post-mortem.
I think one has to be absolutely transparent as far as the finances go. You know, when I first started doing the private work, I started offering services where I saw that there were hitches in the system. For instance, with the heart and lungs, try and get heart and lungs out through the government. They used to do it at NCOH. They then moved it to the government mortuary premises, and the undertakers would have to sit there all day waiting to have the heart and lungs excised. So I thought, well, maybe I could get involved. So I then started offering a service, which I think Dr. Van Staden will have taken over from me as well, where the undertaker fetches the box from the National Centre of Occupational Health, brings it to your premises. The forms are all inside. You can make an appointment with her at 9 o'clock in the morning. By 10 o'clock, the lungs are out. They can be back in your vehicle, gone back to NCOA.
The forms are completed.
The public would prefer that. And that's how my practice slowly grew as I saw, gosh, I can take out pacemakers, I can take out prostates, because it helps the public for not a big charge, but you have a doctor who comes out, and who does it for you on your premises.
And does it timeously. I think that's the other thing.
And I think a lot of families would also prefer that it is private.
And it's left here. They know that
it's not through the state
Correct.
mortuary. I mean, lots of people have misconceptions about the state mortuary. So the fact that knowing that the autopsy will be done at a funeral home is better. They find more comfort in that.
But Gabby, that is not the right word you've used. It's not a misconception. The government mortuaries, I worked there for 38 years. In the end, I left because of the conditions in the mortuary. Dr. Van Staden, she has taken over my practice now. But she was with the government and she's now said, thank you, but no thank you. They promised us a beautiful new mortuary behind the Helen Joseph Hospital. I don't know how many years, Estelle, how long?
I think it's been 10 years in the making.
And a
still
lot
not
of
been
money, and
right
it's
yet.
not complete.
Sure.
Dr. Van Staden worked in a mortuary that was called NEH, the Non-European Hospital, which was converted into a mortuary. The conditions there, it's not a misconception, it's the truth, are atrocious.
The only thing that I think I do need to mention to you is the families can't, in terms of unnatural deaths, the families can't choose that they want a private autopsy. Those deaths have to go to forensic pathology
Because there might be a
state mortuary. Well, if there is if it is an unnatural death, it is a case. It's just the way it is. So those deceased have to go to the government mortuary. We can do a second autopsy if the family prefers that, or that we could do a watching brief. We have a private pathologist attending that autopsy to give another report. But those cases, it's not like you have medical aid and you can decide whether you want to go to a private doctor or you want to go to the state. You don't have that choice if it's an unnatural death. The deaths that we do autopsies on here in your premises, they are all natural deaths, or a redo autopsy then, where it's already been done by the state.
Except for one, Estelle, we had here, I was asked to do a post-mortem. The man was just found collapsed next to the bedroom window. When I did the post-mortem, he'd been shot.
No ways. That was this year.
No, long time ago. And I've picked up lots of poisons on your premises. We do pick up unnatural deaths. And then if that's the case,
referred to.
we then call the police to your premises, as you know, and then the police get involved, and then the body has to be taken to...
I think the biggest problem was when the Chinese two-step.
That's a poison.
Look, how many cases have we had on the Tonkai premises?
A lot. And the Zoom meeting I was on last week for Vosloorus, I did a post-mortem, not here, somewhere else. I picked up Chinese Tuesday, had the body sent back to Vosloorus. I spent Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday morning in court testifying on work that I'd done as an undertaker because the standard of the work at the government mortuary.
Yeah.
So, having private post-mortems, I think, is brilliant, because the other thing is you get your report back.
Correct.
I can only talk from myself. I'm not sure how Estelle's running her practice, but either that night or the next day, and then you consult with the family. With the government mortuary, you can just wait forever. Because they are unnatural deaths that subjudicate, so you're not allowed to talk to those families.
And you're not entitled to a report as the family in an unnatural death. You're never going to get the report unless the investigating officer decides that he's comfortable issuing it.
Well, that's what the families ask us when it is an unnatural. They say, Gabby, when can we get the autopsy report? And you've got to explain, unfortunately, you can't. It's got to go through the investigating officer.
Correct.
It goes to the investigating officer who does his investigation. He then takes his investigation notes plus the doctor's report to the inquest magistrate. In Johannesburg, it's Court 36. They then set aside a date. And the family who identified the body at the government mortuary. So if it's not family, the family not even going to know. So it's a good idea that a family member goes. And then they're informed of the inquest, and once the inquest's been held, they can buy a copy of the report.
Yeah, and that excludes the cases where it's a court case.
Yeah.
If it's a court case, it works slightly different. Then it's got to go through the entire court process. Yeah.
And are these all regulated? Like, do people check up on you as doctors? Like, is there anybody higher than you two?
And there is a person called the Inspector of Anatomy, who is in overall charge of many things. And in fact, your Inspector of Anatomy, I get every year all the bodies from medical school that the students have been dissecting to get them cremated. And it has to go via the Inspector of Anatomy, and then they come to me. There's no charge involved in all of this. These are people who've donated their bodies. So there is an Inspector of Anatomy, and the Inspector of Anatomy is also involved with the exhumation of bodies. You, I believe, have to get the permission of the Inspector of Anatomy to exhume a body, and there are very strict regulations, which you know better than we do.
Yeah.
As to how exhumations are conducted.
And then just regarding burial paperwork, can you just go through the documents when it comes to a burial?
Yes. Shall I answer again? It's actually very straightforward, much easier to bury a person than to cremate. You just need the notification of death to indicate natural causes. It doesn't even have to give a cause of death. And with that, you're entitled, believe it or not, to bury a person. So if you have a person here who wants to be buried, either the doctor who was treating the person can issue it and then you take that certificate to Home Affairs, you get your burial order back, and then the rest is all with you. None of this paperwork. And in fact, when people get into a mess over the cremation papers, we say, well, look, you don't have to have a post-mortem, because they don't have to have a post-mortem. You can bury the deceased. If you don't want to spend that money on having a post-mortem and cremating, which possibly might have been the wishes of the deceased, but so be it, you can bury with a certificate that purely says natural causes.
And obviously later on, if anything had to come about, insurance fraud and things like that, you can exhume the body.
Yes.
Correct.
So obviously with the cremation, once the cremation's been done, you can't undo it.
But
With
burial.
the burial, you can exhume the loved one.
Yes.
Dad, have you got any questions for the doctors regarding cremation paperwork?
I do have a question regarding, there's a very fine line between natural and unnatural when it comes to a natural disaster kind of thing. I'm saying like lightning strike. Is that regarded as a natural cause of death or unnatural?
No. In terms of the law, it's regarded as an unnatural death. The same thing applies to a person, for example, that dies of hypothermia. So the homeless person that dies outside on the street and dies of exposure to the cold, that is a mechanical influence. It's a thermal influence in some instances as well. So that's regarded as an unnatural death.
But Neil, I agree with you, because sometimes it splits hairs. We had a case only yesterday of anaphylaxis, an
Correct.
allergy. Now, let's say you're allergic to peanuts. I mean, that's just something within you. Well, then we can take it. But let's say somebody's allergic to penicillin and they've been given penicillin. Then it's unnatural.
Okay. Yeah.
If you're bitten by a dog, that's unnatural. But what beast
rabies.
Rabies, yes, natural, unless that dog belonged to somebody else. I mean, you could relate it to the dog bite. So you've got to look right at the initial pathology. So one sting bite, if you're an allergic person, yeah, we're happy. But let's say you've got a hive of bees and your neighbor said, Neil, please move them. And you don't move your hive of bees. Well, then we could make the bee stings unnatural. So it does need savvy to be used in each individual case. And sometimes you think, surely that's natural, and it's not.
But it's not. You need
And
to think about
my
it.
belief is that you do more post-mortems and determine the cause of death rather than do too few.
Yeah. I remember years ago, I was actually sent out on a removal out to the southern suburbs where the guy was actually working in his garden and he was bitten by a snake. And I actually stopped in my tracks there and I thought, oh, is this natural or unnatural?
Natural.
You know what I mean? The guy's working in the garden and a snake is natural.
And it's actually unnatural because it's envenomation. It's regarded as an unnatural death.
So that is strange because, as you say, it seems very natural to die.
It does.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so there is, as you say, some confusion over that dividing line.
And even there's disagreement between different pathologists over things like that, and different departments don't always see eye to eye about that either.
But I've never been one for cutting short on postmortems. The doctors are paid at the government mortuary, I think, very well. And certainly if you said to them you'd be paid per body, gosh, you'd have them lining up to do postmortems. I think the money is very good. But what were we saying about the
natural.
rather do too many than not enough?
Can I interject there? The issue might sometimes be, though, that if a body's already at a private undertaker, to get the police to actually take the body to the government mortuary, that's sometimes where the problem comes in. I've had numerous cases where I sit on the phone for hours convincing people, whilst I know the law, that this is an unnatural death, and they simply refuse. And eventually you've got to say, well, then, in fact, let me speak to your station commander, or I will escalate this, because they simply don't believe you.
And there are often police who come out and who would rather take the easy route of not opening an inquest docket, take the body, and yet there are tablets and tablets and tablets.
Yeah, that's happened to me
No,
I'm sure yourself as well, Dad. Tell me something. When us undertakers register the passing of the deceased at Home Affairs, right, and the death certificate has reflected under investigation, what does that mean?
It's a case where the deceased was seen at a government mortuary, and either histology or toxicology, or sometimes a history, is outstanding. So the doctor that did the autopsy cannot determine at that stage whether it's natural or unnatural. Sometimes they have a good idea that it most probably is unnatural, but they cannot say at that stage. And it means that the cremation or the burial can go ahead. It means that the body doesn't need to stay at the mortuary or at your undertakers until toxicology, for example, has been completed, because at this stage, that's a massive crisis in the country. A lot of the toxicology results take more than 10 years to complete.
Wow.
So obviously the family wants to continue burying or cremating the deceased. So that's just like an interim cause of death. And once the autopsy is then completed, so I was the doctor that did the autopsy. Once I've received all the results, and then decide this is, for example, an unnatural death, I would have to write a letter to Home Affairs to say that this death was initially registered as under investigation. The investigations have now been completed. This is the new cause of death. And I would, for example, say, whatever it would be, cocaine, toxicity, whatever the case may be, and this is unnatural. And then a new death certificate will actually be issued to replace that one that said under investigation, and that's the final one then.
If I may interject, Gabby, this is where I found another gap in the market, because people like yourselves would say, now the family want insurance, it says under it. So I say, well, Gabby, what you could have is a second post-mortem, and then I can take the histology. I would drop it off at Lancet Laboratory, so a full-blown histopathologist would examine it. I can send the samples by courier, by you, down to V&M Analytical Toxicology Laboratory in George, and they will analyze them within a few days, and you'll have your answer. So when Estelle talks about 10 years time, the sample's not even worth testing. So it's like saying you're not going to get a result. So in families who can afford it, I strongly suggest a repeat post-mortem, the obtaining of samples, have them, and they'll get the report back within a few days. So it just shows that those who've got the money to do it are able to, and the poor citizens of this country are often the ones who have to wait 10 years.
Yeah.
And people are often uninformed. So if you inform your clients, I think it's a worthwhile exercise for you to do.
Sure.
Definitely. I heard you speak about histology and toxicology. What is that? Can you just elaborate and explain the differences?
So histology is when we look at tissue samples under the microscope. So it's a microscopic examination. So it would be at the behest of the pathologist, he or she would decide what samples are required, and one would then look at that under the microscope. And sometimes there's things which you can't see with the naked eye macroscopically, which you can then see microscopically, and that would help you, would assist you to make a diagnosis. Toxicology is where there's testing of specific samples. We often use blood, urine, bile. We used to use liver sometimes. And you can test whether there's any toxins or any substances in the body, be that something like cocaine or heroin or whatever the case may be, or the levels of medication, for example. Did this person take an overdose of the medication? Were they, for example, accidentally overdosed? Was the dosage administered simply too high? So that would be, there's a quantitative and a qualitative component to that. Qualitative being this is present, and quantitative is looking at the amount, whether that's a toxic amount or not.
If I could just add something to that. I often find that undertakers want to get the person cremated or buried as quickly as possible. But it would be wise for an undertaker, if a person is alleging medical negligence, to engage for a private pathologist to do it. It will be done very comprehensively. Histology will be done, and I'm not trying to sell myself because I'm no longer doing that work. But in cases of medical negligence, the Health Professions Council often insist on there being histology done. Now, the government mortuary laboratory is not working. The doctors don't want to take the samples. They're often not put through. Whereas if Dr. Van Staden's doing it, she'll take the tissue, she'll drop them off at Lancet Laboratory. We get excellent results from them. The V&M toxicology, those are the ideal cases if there's been medical negligence. And I sometimes hear, oh, I wish we'd known that you did that work, because we're getting nowhere with our court case. So there are people out there doing the work.
And is it quite expensive?
Toxicology, yes. It all depends on how many samples you take. They charge per sample. If, let's say, you pick up carbamate, all you need is qualitative. If it's there, it's killed. We don't need a quantity. But if somebody's taken an overdose, well, then you need the quantity as well as the qualitative. And it depends on how many samples are taken. Sometimes people say, do the whole lot. Then is that about 50,000?
Yeah. And for how many things you test, obviously. Not just, so it's the amount of samples you take, so blood, urine, what. And then often families know, or they have an idea of what this person was using or could have used, and then you just do a directed test if costs.
Dr. Van Staden was involved in a very important case up at Limpopo. Do you know she took the trouble to drive to Limpopo? She got the samples. She flew with the samples in her hand to George
to make sure
to
that
the chain of custody.
What happened at the airport? Did they question you?
No.
No,
but they were properly sealed and So I needed to make sure that the samples didn't leave my site.
Sure, it's
so
very
I actually
interesting.
delivered them, and I had the person sign for
so
them.
that is available, but you've just got to be absolutely honest. If you want that, it doesn't come you've got to pay the plumber. You've got to pay the doctor. And I think, I'm dealing with doctors now with an ill husband. Our prices are nothing like what those doctors out there are charging. They're not set. You're allowed to choose your own price. Neil mentioned to me earlier about doctors charging extraordinary prices for a Schedule B. Well, I just think when the prices are ridiculous, the families or the undertakers need to report it to the Health Professions Council and ask them to look into it, because the medical association's not allowed to say what the doctors can charge. That's considered to be a collusion. We are not allowed to collude. So you're not allowed to say, well, let's keep the price at this. And that's why you have people coming in offering you keyhole post-mortem.
Yeah. Is there any other questions, anything else you want to bring up in today's podcast?
Nothing from my side.
No, I just think it's good having a body on premises that you can trust and where you know that the conditions are ideal for a person from the time they've died to the time they're either buried or cremated. And so for most of these things, whether it's taking our pacemakers, hearts and lungs, post-mortems, keep the person here. You can shunt people around the town, but families don't want that.
And we've got something different. We didn't do it on our previous podcast, but we've got a doctor sitting with us today who's written their own book. Dr. Van Staden. Dr. Van Staden, why on earth did you write a book?
If I look back now, I think I was a little bit crazy.
You said it, Doc. You said it.
When I told you that I was a little girl, when I'd say to my mom I wanted to be a doctor, the other thing I told her, there were two other things I told her. The one was, one day I want to write a book and I want to be on TV. and I've done both of those as well.
Yeah, because you've been in a couple of TV series as well.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Not in, she's the main character.
That was Autopsy in Afrikaans.
Autopsy, yes, that's correct.
Was there another one?
No, there's just a few series of Autopsy. But what has happened was that, it kind of flew out of my mind. And then I was approached after Autopsy we started talking about that. NB Publishers actually contacted me and said, well, don't you want to actually write a book? And it took quite a bit of consideration from my side because I realized that it's quite an involved process. I didn't know how involved and how much time it does take. And that's why I say I was a little bit crazy. But yeah, so after they approached me, I thought, well, it might actually be something worth doing. So I did.
I must say, we got quite a bit of traction from your book. It was last year. A gentleman, he's a producer in Namibia. I think it's him and his brother. And he called us up and he said, please, we would like to film a show. So I said, okay, well, come and tell us. And he kept saying it's based on a doctor's book, Autopsies. Anyway, they ended up doing their trailer here, which is phenomenal. They ended up winning the best trailer at the film in Cannes, and I think it's in France. And they've actually been in contact with me asking, because now they've got the financial support to actually do the entire series, which is based on your book, Doc. So that's incredible. So I don't know. I think it's quite special to myself and to my father and to Tom Kite. If you wouldn't mind just signing and giving us a note in that book,
Of course,
so that we can keep
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
You are most welcome.
Anything else from you, Dad?
Last. When we were discussing about what comes back from Home Affairs, I wish one form that they would actually change is the name of the burial order. Because when we try and explain to somebody that we're going to cremate and we explaining to the family that amongst those documents is a burial order, oh my goodness, do they go off? But it's not a burial, it's a cremation. Can they not just change the name?
No, and on the form it also says place of burial.
Exactly.
So I have to explain to everybody, no, it's not burial, that's cremation. But it really just shows us that the death has been properly registered in South Africa.
Yeah. And if you guys don't mind explaining, because there's so many doctors out there, GPs and everything like that, that do not have a BI 1663 or DHA 1663. And then they ask us to actually supply that, which is a problem for us.
Problem.
And would you consider it, are they just too lazy to go to Home Affairs and collect one of the books?
Let me tell you how the process works. Is a doctor is meant to go, for instance, to Randburg or Johannesburg. Terrifying. I mean, I used to do it and I used to pick up my own books. And I just felt totally unsafe.
Sure.
But that is what doctors are meant to do. What a doctor can do, which is what I went on to, is I would write a letter to Home Affairs and I'd say, I'm unable to get to your premises, whatever these are for my use, because if there's any fraud on any of my forms, I'm the one in trouble.
Exactly.
So Neil, you can't ask me, please may I have pages out of your book to take to Joe Blogs, because if Joe Blogs is up to nonsense, I'm in trouble.
Yes.
So
Because that serial number is
They record
allocated
those
to,
numbers, yeah.
Yes.
and then you have to return all the books when they're full to them, and they keep a tally of it. How well it's done, I'm not sure. But doctors can go themselves, or they can write a letter, or I know you lose business if they say, oh, don't worry, we'll go to another undertaker who can, because there are undertakers, particularly I've seen them in Pretoria, who've got their own books. So
Are we allowed to report those?
you can report whatever in the world is wrong.
Opening up a different can of worms there.
No, Gabby, I think Tom Kite stands for excellence. It stands for being above the law. And I think you just do things properly. And I think you sell yourself by your reputation. And certainly we have reputation, well, the undertakers out there, and we know who we work for. We know who we don't work for.
Absolutely.
And you both are very respected in the industry, really. I'll never forget going to the government mortuary, and the one of the workers at the government mortuary said, does Pat Klep do your post-mortems, your autopsies? I said, yeah. They said, oh, we're very scared. We're very scared. So let me just tell you, you are both very respected in the industry, and we, the pair of us and the whole company, are absolutely delighted to have the pair of you on this podcast. And I think without you guys, I mean, we're a trusted funeral home, but you guys give us that You do things by the book, you do things correctly. And again, because you are respected in the industry. So thank you to the peer review.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just to the viewers, this is the 4th episode. This podcast is sponsored by Tom Kite Funeral Plans, as well as Tom Kite Pty Ltd Funeral Directors, international and local directors. Thank you very much for watching. You can put some questions and answers on the YouTube link. And thank you again to Real Global Productions for hosting our podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.